In that moment, as if time slowed down for a few seconds, the entire city seemed to pause to listen to the most anticipated storytelling moment on YouTube. Starting now, Letters of Life. My name is Emily Carter, and even today I still struggle to believe that everything I'm about to tell you really happened. Sometimes I think that not even in soap operas or in those overly dramatic movies we watch late at night have I ever seen a story quite like mine. If I stop and replay everything from the beginning, scene by scene, it really does feel like a script someone wrote. The first look, the first word, the first tiny decision that changed everything. From the very first moment I saw him, I had the strange feeling that my life would never be the same again. I just didn't know yet whether that was a blessing or a curse. The day a stranger stopped at my gate, it all started on what should have been just another ordinary day. It was late morning. The sun was high but not too harsh, and the air had that lazy warmth that makes everything feel slower than it really is. I had just walked through the front gate of my house, struggling with a couple of grocery bags and already thinking about what I was going to cook for lunch, when I heard the low rumble of an engine approaching. A car slowed down and pulled up near my gate. I didn't pay attention at first. On my street, it wasn't unusual for people to stop to ask for directions or to turn around. But then I heard a male voice call out, "Good morning." There was something about that voice, deep, slightly rough, but calm. A voice that seemed to vibrate in the air for a second longer than it should. Instinctively, I turned my head, and that was the first time I saw him. He was getting out of an old, slightly worn car, one of those vehicles that clearly had seen better days but still ran because someone cared enough to keep it alive. He closed the door, adjusted his shirt, wiped his hands on his pants as if brushing off invisible dust, and then looked straight at me. For a second, everything felt strangely quiet. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I honestly had the impression that I heard something like bells ringing in the background. Maybe it was just the sound of the neighbor's wind chimes. Maybe it was my imagination. All I know is that I froze there in front of my own house, staring at a complete stranger who looked oddly familiar to my heart, even though my mind had never seen him before. He gave me a polite half-smile and walked closer to the fence. "My name is William," he said. "William Hayes. I'm a gardener. I was passing by and noticed your yard could use a little work." He glanced over my shoulder toward the backyard, where the grass really was overgrown and wild. "If you'd like," he continued, "I can fix it up for you. Trim the grass, clean up the plants, maybe make it look a bit more alive. I can do it for a fair price." I must have blinked 3 or 4 times before answering anything. He wasn't wrong. My small yard had practically given up on me. I used to be the one who trimmed the grass, swept the leaves, and tried to keep the plants from dying. But over the last few months, everything in my life had become so rushed and chaotic that the garden was the first thing I stopped taking care of. I lived alone. I was divorced. There was no one to help with anything, no one to take out the trash, to fix something broken, or to mow the lawn. Everything depended on me. And the truth is, I was tired. So the stranger's offer came almost like an unexpected relief. "Well," I finally managed to say, shifting the grocery bags in my arms, "yes, it really does need some work. How much would you charge?" We talked for a few minutes. He explained what he could do. I nodded. We discussed prices. It was all very normal, at least on the surface. Inside, however, I was oddly nervous. I didn't know why that man whose name I had just heard made my heart beat a little faster. In the end, we agreed on a price, and he opened the trunk of his car to grab his tools. That was when everything started to become strange. Watching from the window, I went inside the house, put the groceries away, tried to distract myself with small tasks. But for some reason, my mind just wouldn't settle. It kept going back to him, to the sound of his voice, to the way he had looked at me, to the way he moved, calm and secure, as if he had all the time in the world. I tried to resist, but after a few minutes, I found myself walking toward the living room window. Just to check on the garden, I told myself, just to see how the work was going. I pulled the curtain back slightly and peeked outside. There he was, standing in the sun, wearing a simple shirt and pants, holding a trimmer and moving it in firm, controlled motions. Bits of grass flew around his ankles. The old car rested in the driveway like a silent witness. I looked at him for 2 or 3 seconds and then quickly moved back as if I had been caught doing something wrong. "What are you doing, Emily?" I scolded myself. "You don't even know this man." I tried to focus on something else again, washed a few dishes, wiped the kitchen counter, organized the groceries. But in less than 10 minutes, I was back at the window. I peeked outside again. He was still working. He bent down, adjusted a hose, grabbed a rake. His movements were firm and precise, the posture of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. His shirt was starting to stick to his back with sweat. The sun highlighted the short hair on his arms and the days-old stubble on his face. He wasn't conventionally handsome. If I saw him passing by on a busy street, maybe I wouldn't even notice. But in that moment, in that context, in my yard, he seemed to fill that entire small space with his presence. And there was something else, something almost intangible, a kind of silence around him, a gravity, a calm intensity that drew my gaze back again and again. I must have gone to the window at least 5 or 6 times in that first hour alone. Every time I looked, I felt a strange mix of guilt and fascination. 5 years. For almost 5 years since my divorce, I hadn't let myself feel anything for anyone. My life was work, bills, house, sleep. My friends joked that I was becoming a nun, and yet there I was, a grown woman, peeking through the window like a teenager spying on the boy next door. I barely recognized myself, a glass of juice, and a dangerous question. Eventually, I heard a knock on the door. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and opened it. William stood there, a little flushed from the heat, shirt slightly damp with sweat. He gave me that same half-smile from before. "Sorry to bother you," he said, "but could I have a glass of water?" "Sure," I answered quickly. "Just a second." As luck would have it, I had just made a jug of fresh juice in the kitchen. Without thinking too much, I grabbed a glass, filled it, and brought it to him. "It's juice," I explained. "Hope you don't mind." "Juice is perfect." He took a sip and let out a short, satisfied sigh. I stayed there, standing in the doorway, watching him drink. The whole thing was simple, almost ordinary. A gardener working, asking for a drink, the house owner offering it. But inside me, nothing felt ordinary at all. I noticed the veins in his forearms, the way his fingers wrapped around the glass, the small lines at the corners of his eyes when he squinted slightly against the light. He seemed older than me, but not old, mature, solid. He noticed that I was staring. I looked away immediately, embarrassed, but then he asked, almost casually, Is your husband at work? The question hit me like a soft slap. I, I don't have a husband, I replied. I'm divorced. I live alone. He nodded slowly, as if that information interested him more than he wanted to show. Got it, he said. That's tough. A house this size all by yourself. He didn't say anything else after that, but he didn't need to. The tone of his voice, the look in his eyes, there was something between one word and the next that hinted at a hidden question, an unspoken possibility, and that alone was enough to make my heart beat even faster. A bold invitation. He went back to work, and I went back to the window. By that point, I had given up on pretending. I knew I was watching him. I suspected he knew it too. Sometimes I had the impression that he deliberately moved a little slower when he was right in front of the window. After a while, he turned off the trimmer, put the tool aside, and looked toward the house as if searching for me. When he saw me standing by the door, he smiled. "Hey," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "I was thinking—" I felt my chest tighten. Nothing good ever starts with "I was thinking." "What would you say about grabbing a beer later?" he asked. "After I finish here. There's a small diner at the corner. It's nothing fancy, but the beer's cold." For a moment, I thought he was joking. I had met him less than 2 hours earlier. He was a stranger, a man who had stopped his car in front of my gate, said he was a gardener, and offered his services. That was it. No history, no references, nothing. Any sensible woman would have refused. Any cautious, logical, well-adjusted adult would have said no. But I was not as sensible as I thought. The truth is, I wanted to say yes the second he finished the question. I tried to tell myself that it was just a drink, just a beer, just a simple conversation between two adults. But somewhere deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was something dangerous about that invitation, something that whispered to me that if I took that small step, nothing would be exactly the same afterward. I hesitated. My silence probably lasted only a couple of seconds, but it felt much longer. He noticed my hesitation and insisted, with an easy smile, "Come on, just one beer. I'll pay." And before I could stop myself, I heard my own voice answer, "Okay?" It was just one word, but it opened a door I had no idea how to close later. "Do you want to take a shower first?" He went back to work with renewed energy after that. I tried to ignore the butterflies in my stomach, but they were relentless. I kept imagining what the conversation would be like, what he would ask, what I would say. I imagined us sitting at a table in that little diner, the sound of glasses, the muted murmur of other people talking around us. The more I imagined, the more anxious I became. Almost an hour later, he knocked on the door again. "All done," he said. "Your yard looks brand new." I thanked him, and we walked together to the backyard so I could take a look. It really did look different. The grass trimmed, the edges clean, the plants seemingly more alive somehow. "You did a great job," I said sincerely. He wiped a bit of sweat from his forehead, breathing a little heavier. "So," he said, grinning, "how about that beer?" I looked at him, his shirt clinging to his chest and shoulders, his hair damp, his hands slightly dirty from the work, and something slipped out of my mouth before my brain had time to censor it. "Do you want to take a shower first?" As soon as I said it, I wanted to swallow the words back. He blinked, clearly surprised. "Can I?" he asked. I nodded, feeling my cheeks burn. "Yes, of course. I'll get you a towel." I walked back into the house in a rush, my heart pounding in my ears. What on earth was I doing? Offering my bathroom to a man I had just met? Allowing him into my home, into my private space? But it was too late. I grabbed a clean towel, showed him the bathroom, and left the door slightly ajar so he could find it easily. When I heard the water running, I leaned against the wall in the hallway, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. I felt like time had folded in on itself, and I was suddenly 20 years younger, standing at the edge of something I didn't fully understand. I wish I could say I thought things through, weighed the risks, and made a conscious decision. I didn't. I simply followed the pull of something I hadn't felt in a long time. One step too far. When he came out of the bathroom, his hair was damp, brushed back, and he was wearing the same clothes, but somehow he looked different, lighter, fresher. The scent of soap followed behind him like an invisible cloud. Our eyes met in the hallway. Neither of us said anything at first. And then, as if a line had been crossed the moment he stepped out of that bathroom, he took a step toward me. I could have stepped back. I could have turned away. I could have said, "I think you should go now." But I didn't. I stood where I was, my heart racing, my breath shallow. He raised his hand slowly and touched my cheek. His fingers were warm, rough from work, but gentle in that moment. He searched my eyes as if asking for permission without words. I gave it. The first kiss happened there, in the hallway, under the faint light coming from the window. It wasn't rushed or clumsy. It was deep, slow, like something that had been waiting years to happen. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Minutes, maybe. Long enough for my knees to feel weak and for me to forget everything I had promised myself after my divorce. That I would be more careful, more rational, more guarded. One thing led to another. We moved from the hallway to my bedroom, from the first kiss to the second, to the third, to things that had no words, only touch and breath and skin. And that is how, after almost 5 years of silence in my love life, a complete stranger became the first man to lie in my bed again. One night, and then another. When everything was over and silence settled over the room, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what I had just done. William turned on his side, watched me for a moment, and then started talking. He told me he had just arrived in Curitiba a short time ago, that he had lived most of his life in a small town called Imbituva, that he didn't have a good relationship with his family, that he had left everything behind to try to start over somewhere else. His words were simple. His tone was honest, or at least it sounded that way. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Later, as the afternoon began to fade, he looked at me with a mixture of shyness and boldness that I would come to recognize well. "Can I ask you something?" "You already did," I tried to joke, my voice still fragile. He smiled faintly. "Do you think I could stay here tonight?" he asked. "Just tonight. Tomorrow morning I'll go out early, look for a place to rent around here. I liked this neighborhood, and I really like being here with you." My head screamed no. Every caution sign inside me lit up at once. But my heart was already somewhere else. I thought of how lonely the house usually felt, of how empty the nights were, of how long it had been since I had shared the bed with someone, of how natural and strangely familiar it felt to have him there. So, once again, I said yes. He stayed that night, then he stayed the next one, and the next. Days slowly turned into weeks, without any formal decision, without any serious conversation, William ended up moving in with me. The toothbrush appeared in my bathroom. His clothes started to fill a drawer, then half the closet. His tools found a corner in the yard. When I realized it, he was no longer a visitor. He was part of the house, part of my routine, part of my life, and, more dangerously, part of my heart. A love that felt like a script. My friend said I was crazy. "Emily, you barely know this guy. You let a stranger move into your house? Be careful. It's too fast, too sudden," my neighbors whispered. I could see the glances from across the street, the curtains moving when I stepped outside with him, the way conversation stopped when we passed by. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt alive. He knew how to be sweet without being sticky. He helped around the house, took out the trash, fixed a leaky faucet, made coffee in the morning. At night, he would sometimes sit with me on the couch, and we would talk for hours about nothing and everything. He told me stories about his supposed childhood in the countryside, about how he had learned to work with his hands early on, about how he had always dreamed of moving to a bigger city. He said he had no one, no wife, no children, no real family connections. And every time he said that, I felt a strange mix of sadness and opportunity. Sadness for the life he claimed to have had, and opportunity because it meant, in theory, that there was space in his life for me. Little by little, I fell in love. Deeply. Completely. Looking back now, I know that I saw the signs. Little contradictions here and there, gaps in his stories, moments when he changed the subject a bit too quickly. Times when he stared into space as if remembering something he didn't want to talk about. But love has a way of smoothing out the edges of reality. I chose not to see. The idea of a wedding. Some months passed. Our lives intertwined more and more. His presence became so natural in my home that I found it hard to imagine the house without him. One day, I brought up the subject of marriage. Not the traditional church wedding. I couldn't get married in church again because of my previous marriage, but a symbolic celebration. Something small, intimate, a way of making what we already lived official in front of our friends, my family, my neighbors, in front of the world. He didn't like the idea at first. "Why do we need that?" he asked. "We already live together. We're fine like this." But I had always been a romantic. For me, marriage wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a statement, a commitment, a way of saying, "This is my person, this is who I choose." I insisted gently, then not so gently. I came back to the subject again and again, always in a loving tone, always with a smile, always trying to show him how beautiful it could be. Eventually, he gave in. "Fine," he said one night. "If it's that important to you, let's do it." I hugged him, thrilled, and started planning everything that same week. We rented a modest restaurant hall in the neighborhood. I invited my family, my closest friends, some co-workers, a few neighbors. William, however, didn't invite anyone from his side. "I don't really talk to my family," he said when I asked. "We're not on good terms." I found it strange, of course, but by then I was so involved, so sure of my love, that I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. Some families are complicated. Some people really do prefer to cut ties completely. At least, that's what I told myself. The night everything broke, the day of the wedding came. The restaurant was decorated in a simple but charming way. White tablecloths, some flowers, a small arch where we would stand during the ceremony. The guests arrived little by little, filling the space with conversation and laughter. I wore a light dress, not quite a traditional wedding gown, but still special, chosen just for that day. William wore a suit that made him look more elegant, more serious than usual. We had a pastor, a friend of my family, who had agreed to conduct a symbolic ceremony for us. It was beautiful. We exchanged words, promises, looks. The guests clapped. Some people cried, someone made a toast. After the ceremony, dinner was served. People ate, talked, laughed. For a short while, everything seemed perfect. I remember looking around, seeing my friends, my relatives, my neighbors, all together in that small restaurant, and feeling a strong wave of gratitude. I thought, finally, after so much pain, so many lonely nights, I'm getting my happy ending. I didn't know that my story was about to turn into a nightmare. I noticed her before anyone else. A woman walked into the restaurant holding a boy by the wrist. She didn't look lost or shy or confused. She walked with purpose, as if she knew exactly where she was going. She came closer and closer, and an uncomfortable cold began to spread through my chest. When William saw her, he went pale. The color drained from his face in an instant. His eyes widened with unmistakable fear. He looked at me, then at her, then at me again, and all the easy confidence I had always seen in him disappeared. The woman stopped right in front of our table. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The restaurant noise seemed to fade into a distant echo. I could feel all eyes turning toward us, sensing that something was wrong. The woman stared at William with a mixture of anger and hurt that I will never forget. Her voice, however, came out low and controlled. "You're unbelievable, William." She gave a bitter laugh. "So that's why you disappeared, huh? Everyone's scared, thinking something might have happened to you, and you're here, enjoying life." She tightened her grip on the boy's hand. "Your son almost died the other day," she continued, "and here you are smiling, celebrating, acting like you don't have a past, like you don't have a family." The word son hit me like ice water. I looked at William, waiting for him to deny it, to say there had been a misunderstanding, to do anything. He said nothing. His silence screamed louder than anything he could have said. I turned to the woman, my voice trembling. "Who are you?" She looked back at me, her eyes filled with a fury that had clearly been growing for a long time. "I'm his wife," she said. "My name is Sarah Miller. This," she nodded toward the boy, "is Michael, his son." The boy, who must have been around 6 or 7, looked at William with confusion and sadness. "Dad?" he whispered, and in that single word, every lie, every omission, every carefully hidden truth came crashing down. The mask falls. The room erupted into whispers. Chairs creaked, glasses clinked, someone dropped a fork. My vision blurred for a second, and I felt as if the ground under my feet had disappeared. I looked at William again. "Is this true?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Is she your wife? Is he your son?" He ran a hand through his hair, looked around, looked at me, looked at Sarah, and finally lowered his head. He still didn't say anything, and that silence was my answer. Sarah, however, didn't stop. She gestured around the restaurant. "Look at this," she said. "Decorations, celebration. You even have a pastor here. Did you tell them you already had a wife back home? Did you mention the child you left behind when you disappeared without saying a word?"
I wanted to yell, to scream, to cry, to push him, slap him, demand an explanation. but I felt frozen, trapped inside my own body. I realized that everyone was watching me, my family, my friends, my neighbors. The humiliation burned under my skin. I had defended him. I had believed him. I had brought this man into my house, into my bed, into my life. And all along, he had a wife and a son in another town. I don't remember exactly what I said next. The memories from that moment are fragmented, like broken glass. I know there were tears mine, Sarah's, maybe even his. I know there were raised voices, arguments, attempts at justification, but nothing could change the basic truth. He had lied about everything that really mattered. Throwing him out. After the chaos at the restaurant, after the uncomfortable goodbyes, after the whispering guests and the embarrassed looks, I went home feeling like a different person. It was as if the version of me who had believed in love, who had dreamed of a symbolic wedding, had stayed there in that restaurant, sitting among the empty plates and stained tablecloths. The woman who entered the house that night was made of something else. Hurt, anger, disappointment. William tried to talk to me. He followed me into the living room, reaching for my arm. "Emily, please, let me explain." I pulled away. "Explain what?" I asked. "That you abandoned your wife and your son? That you moved into my house pretending to be alone? That you let me plan a wedding while they were looking for you?" He stammered something about problems in the marriage, about fights, about feeling trapped, about wanting to start over. "I was going to tell you," he insisted. "I just didn't know how." I laughed, a short, bitter sound I barely recognized as my own. "You had months to tell me," I said. "Months, William. You slept in my bed, ate at my table, lived under my roof. You had 1,000 chances to tell me. You just didn't want to risk losing what you had here." He tried to touch me again, but I took a step back. "I want you to leave," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Emily, please, leave. Maybe if we had been alone in the world, if there were no wife, no child, no lies, things could have been different." But the truth was simple and brutal. He had abandoned a family to build a new life on a foundation of deception. And if he had done that to them, he could easily do it to me someday. So I asked him to pack his things. I watched as he gathered his clothes, his tools, his few possessions. Each object he picked up felt like another piece of my illusion being removed from the house. He left late that night. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed in the empty hallway for a long time. The aftermath. In the days that followed, the story spread through the neighborhood like fire. Some people pretended not to know anything when they saw me, but the pity in their eyes betrayed them. Others were less subtle and brought up the subject directly, under the guise of concern. "Are you okay, dear? I heard what happened. What a shame. Men can be so cruel." I nodded, forced a small smile, said I was fine, that I'd get over it. Inside, however, I felt like my chest had been hollowed out. I replayed every conversation, every scene, every laugh, every time William had said he was alone in the world, every time I had talked about our future, every time I had defended him when someone hinted it was all moving too fast. I wasn't just grieving the end of a relationship. I was grieving my own ignorance, my credulity, My naive hope that, after so many disappointments, life would finally give me something good. Some nights, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark, and asked myself, how could I have been so blind? There's no easy answer. People like William don't arrive with a warning label. They arrive with smiles, stories, gestures of kindness. They say what you need to hear. They fill the gaps in your life and in your heart so perfectly that you begin to believe they were made to fit there. And by the time the truth appears, it's too late. You're already in love, already committed, already dreaming. Life is not a TV show. Remember when I said at the beginning that my story felt like a soap opera? Well, this is where the comparison ends. In soap operas, the villain is often punished. The liar is exposed and pays the price. The heroine suffers, yes, but in the end, she finds a new love, a fresh start, a happy ending. In real life, things are messier. William didn't go to jail. He didn't disappear into thin air. He didn't suffer some spectacular punishment. From what I heard later through whispers and rumors, he eventually went back to his town for a while, then left again. Maybe he tried to start over somewhere else, with someone else. I don't know. And honestly, I don't want to know. As for me, there was no new love waiting around the corner. No magical redemption. Just a long, slow process of picking up the pieces, paying the bills, cleaning the house, facing the sideways glances from neighbors, listening to my own thoughts echoing too loudly in the empty rooms. But, in a strange way, that's also part of the story. My story is not about a perfect happy ending. It's about what happens when the lights go out, when the guests leave, when the decorations are taken down, and only the truth is left behind. It's about a woman who fell in love with a man who didn't deserve her trust. A woman who believed in promises that were never real. A woman who had to learn, the hardest way possible, that sometimes the person who plays the role of the hero in your life is also the villain. And yet, even with all the pain, there is one thing I hold on to. I survived. I didn't disappear. I didn't shatter completely. I cried, yes. I doubted myself, yes. I spent nights asking, why, to a silence that never answered. But little by little, day by day, I went back to living. The garden grew wild again for a while. One afternoon, a few months later, I picked up the trimmer myself. I stood in the yard, under the sun, and started cutting the grass, slowly, clumsily. My hands shook at first, not from the effort, but from the memories. But with each line I drew on the ground, each patch I trimmed, I felt like I was reclaiming a little bit of my own story. This time, there was no stranger at the gate. No old car parked in front of the house. No deep voice offering help. Just me. Emily Carter. Divorced, yes. Hurt, yes. But still here. And that, in the end, is what matters. Because life is not a TV show. Not everything ends with a kiss, a sunset, and a happy song. Sometimes, the ending is just a woman standing alone in her yard, taking care of her own garden, one cut at a time, and learning, slowly, that this, too, is a kind of beginning.